You hear the screeching of an owl, you hear the wind begin to howl. You know there's zombies on the prowl, and it's terror time again.
Hello everybody and welcome to this month's free preview of our latest episode of What a Cartoon Movie, all about Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. I am one of your hosts, Bob Mackey, and I gotta say, it's fall and ascots are back in fashion. My neck was getting a little chilly.
Hey, I'm Henry Gilbert, and really, Rascot.
And Henry promises he won't be talking like that for the next 3 hours and 40 minutes if you actually listen to the full thing. But for now, if you're listening to this on the free feed or on the $5 feed on Patreon, this is just a free sample of our 3 hour and 40-minute podcast all about the amazing Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, the 1998 direct-to-video movie that kicked off the Scooby-Doo renaissance. And I dare say it is the first truly good Scooby-Doo thing to ever have been created.
Yeah, this was chosen by our listeners as the scary movie of Halloween month. And this was a great pick by you guys, and I'm glad you did, because it was not only did we get to do it right after doing classic Scooby-Doo Where Are You last week, but also getting to cover the best Scooby-Doo thing because it's got it all. It's self-referential. It is respectful, though, of the history. It is incredibly well animated. The best animated thing with Scooby probably ever has been.
Yes.
And, of course, that's because it is the fourth best thing, anime.
Yes, secretly anime, like everything we love.
We have so much fun talking about this, and you're going to hear a bit of the history, a very interesting history about how this was made in a very weird time for Hanna-Barbera, the Scooby-Doo property, and cartoons in general in the late 90s.
So if you like this and you want to hear the whole thing and also get access to over 20 episodes of What a Cartoon Movie, and they're all usually around 3 to almost 5 hours long at this point, please go to patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. Sign up there. At the $10 level, you'll get just that, but also access to all the $5 stuff as well. That includes all of our limited miniseries, interviews, season wrap-ups, and deleted scene specials for Talking Simpsons. Over 100 bonus episodes of stuff to go through. If you enjoy our podcast, you've not been on the Patreon yet, there are so many things you haven't heard, so many episodes of things we've talked about that you haven't heard yet, and I guarantee you will love all the stuff lurking behind the spooky paywall at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons.
So if you enjoy this Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island treat, then you're going to not be tricked if you sign up at the $10 level at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons to hear all the rest of it. And so many films we've done, as diverse as Return of Jafar, the Aladdin sequel, a Goofy movie, Akira, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and many, many more. So please consider signing up at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. And now let's head to Zombie Island.
It's terror time again, and you just might die of fright. It's a terrifying time.
But how did we get here in the Scooby-Dooby history? Well, a whole lot happened in between Scooby-Doo Where Are You and the release of Zombie Island 29 years later. And I'm just going to gloss over that very quickly because no doubt we will do lots of other Scooby-Doo cartoons in the future. But basically, from Where Are You up to the early 90s, Scooby-Doo was Hanna-Barbera's biggest thing. Like, it was the moneymaker. That silly dog basically became their Mickey Mouse very quickly. And so between 1969 and 1991, there was almost always a new season of Scooby-Doo premiering in the fall of something related to Scooby.
Yeah, and I feel like when we were kids after Pup, it was like a dark age of Scooby-Doo, which is why people that are only 10 years younger than us, they also grew up in a period with endless Scooby-Doo cartoons, but we were in the awkward 90s where Scooby was a target for parody and satire, not like a thing that stood on its own.
Yeah, you can see over time the character Scooby, like, he goes through this arc with the general public where, like, the 70s was just straightforward Scooby stuff. Like, hey, it's more Scooby. This time he's meeting celebrities, or he's the host of the Laugh Olympics. Like, they're called Scooby-Doo's All-Star Laugh Olympics, not Yogi Bear's All-Star Laugh Olympics. Olympics. And then as they enter the 80s, you can see there's a feeling from the creative side of like, this is starting to get a little old. Let's get rid of Fred and Velma. They're dead weight.
Put Shaggy in a red shirt.
Put Shaggy in a red shirt and give him sneakers.
Kids love red.
And of course, let's give him a stupid baby friend called Scrappy-Doo, who defines the 80s. Scrappy-Doo, and also to a lesser extent Flim Flam and other dumb sidekicks. It's like they were trying to maximize their Scooby potential by giving him tons of clones all around him, and it just sucked.
Scooby-Dum.
Oh yeah, Scooby-Dum, his hick cousin. It's like, I think Scooby's dumb enough as it is, guys.
He's not known for his intellect.
And so we did have Pup Named Scooby-Doo in 87 that did bring back the original cast, but as kids. But other than that, the classic Scooby Mystery Inc. gang was pretty much done. Like, Daphne was in 13 Ghosts, but everything after that, they were like, if we're going to have an adult Scooby and Shaggy, that's all we need. We don't need any of the other side characters. So, like, classic Scooby-Doo is getting lost, and that was very evident when Hanna-Barbera started their, 7 years of TV movies, where they did a couple TV movies every year. 3 of them starring Scooby and Shaggy that were like the Boo Brothers, the Reluctant Werewolf, OKKO's beloved Ghoul School. Those were these also attempted repiloting of Scooby-Doo with new 80s friends.
It was interesting to see. Well, this is the 80s or the 90s?
This is late 80s.
Okay, I was going to say, we'll get to the 90s, so I apologize.
Well, so we get to 91. Pup Named Scooby-Doo's over. Batman, Ren and Stimpy, Simpsons. It is a new era for animation, and Scooby is really getting lost in the shuffle. There's not going to be a new Scooby show. The last Scooby-Doo movie is this thing called Scooby-Doo and Arabian Nights, which is trash.
You told me all about that. It's a real bait and switch, right?
Yeah, so you get 15 minutes of Shaggy and Scooby heading to seemingly medieval Agrabah. Well, it's a giant Aladdin ripoff. But basically, Shaggy and Scooby work for an Eddie Deason man-dark-looking sultan, and they tell him stories that are first just a rip-off of Aladdin, except where Yogi Bear and Boo Boo are the genie.
Well, I'm there for the promise of Eddie Deason. Aha, that was a good story.
You actually just said a line you said it.
I've heard of a sandwich, but this is ridiculous. Is there a sandwich pun because they're surrounded by sand?
They actually, that's a missed opportunity there. What's really weird is they eat accurate Arab food for the region. They're like, that's tahini, that's hummus. And they're like, man, this is good food. Other than a giant cake, they eat a very European style cake in it. But anyway, it sucks. And Shaggy and Scooby look awful. It's an ugly film. And it's the final appearance of Don Messick and the final appearance of the voice of Magilla Gorilla too, and it just has this feel of the death throes of a dying company, because Hanna-Barbera did in the early 90s, they got bought by Turner, and Turner's not sure what they want to do with Hanna-Barbera. They don't seem to be into doing more Scooby-Doo. It's mainly just used as the thing that produces their environmentalist propaganda that is Captain Planet. That's kind of mainly what it's used for. And then on top of that, they're like, well, there's this Ren and Stimpy and all the Nicktoons. We should be doing that instead. So instead of greenlighting more stuff with Yogi or Shaggy, they instead are like, let's do Two Stupid Dogs. And from Two Stupid Dogs grows all the Cartoon Network's originals.
Yeah, they were a lesser player in the cartoons arms race of the 90s, but they were still a player.
Yeah.
By basically taking the Nicktoons model over time.
And it was you have the creaky old Hanna-Barbera machinery that, since the 50s had existed. And from reading Iwao Takamoto's book, it's very clear that it was run like a family business of you work your way up from the mailroom and you get to know people and it grows and all these lifers. And then that gets bought by Turner, and it takes years for a corporate monster to fully eat it and shit it back out as a new machine. Yeah, the Hanna-Barbera pretty much turns into Cartoon Network Studios and is making new things and not really exploiting those old characters except in endless reruns on Cartoon Network. So we get to 1997. The Gen Xers are starting to take over the production of these things. And Gen Xers, in an ironic way, love Scooby-Doo. And that is no more clear than in the 1997 episode of Johnny Bravo, Bravo Doobie-Doo, where they get back together the majority of the original cast, who's not dead, and they do a lengthy parody of Scooby-Doo. That's all the jokes you would have made about Scooby-Doo in the 90s, except now they are doing it officially.
I didn't really care for Johnny Bravo, but I actually liked that so much that I recorded it.
Yeah, I did too. It had to be my favorite episode. I just paid for it to watch it one more time on Amazon Prime, and it came with the lengthy Schoolhouse Rock parody.
Oh, right.
That Seth MacFarlane's a writer in, and when you watch it, you're like, this is just a Family Guy bit. Like, especially the Schoolhouse Rock guy is a Seth MacFarlane just drawing. But anyway, that Johnny Bravo thing shows there's an interest from the younger guys with Scooby-Doo. Not to mention that reportedly Scooby-Doo reruns were among, if not the highest rated thing on Cartoon Network in the mid-90s. Because that's once they got the rights to all the Scooby stuff away from Saturday morning, those reruns were doing gangbusters on Cartoon Network. I think with both kids and stoners with daytimes free to watch endless Scooby reruns. And you can see all the funny commercials made for Scooby-Doo, made by the guys who would later become, all the Adult Swim creators. They were making the Fred and Daphne actually started a beet farm in Wisconsin after they retired. Like jokes like that.
Yeah, I love that era of Cartoon Network commercials where it was like the pre-Adult Swim, so it wasn't too risque, but it was still like, what if Shaggy and Droopy were from Pulp Fiction?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Probably drawn by C. Martin Croker.
Get Birdman coffee.
Yeah, all that hilarious stuff. Like, and it's basically interns discovering how to write comedy while not being paid to be a comedy writer. So that's where Scooby's at popularity-wise, but, there's no Scooby-Doo in 1990 after 1991 as a series when Pup is over, and even that wasn't traditional Scooby. And then they have that crappy Arabian Nights movie in 94, which Scooby isn't even the main character in. Meanwhile, Hanna-Barbera, I think too, now they're sort of under the same banner as Warner, and they're looking at Batman the Animated Series. They're like, well, what are we doing? We need to have something cool, hip, and 90s. Now, there's Two Stupid Dogs, but the action side of that was SWAT Cats.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a whole other podcast on its own. But as I found out, SWAT Cats is like the root of Zombie Island. Like, that's how Zombie Island exists, is thanks to SWAT Cats. So SWAT Cats, as I found out, was actually created by two guys who own the characters, the Tremblay brothers, which is kind of why you've never seen more SWAT Cats. The guys who made it work as a series were writer-producer team of Davis Doy, Glenn Leopold, Lance Falk, and also director Jim Strensom. So let's talk about these guys. Davis Doy was the most senior of the group. He's a pupil of Ralph Bakshi, like he worked on The Lord of the Rings, Ralph Bakshi, but then moved to Hanna-Barbera in 1981 in the design department. He had a lot of jobs as director and story editor, so he is a writer who can draw. And he worked on classics like The Smurfs, which kept the lights on in Hanna-Barbera in the 80s. Even Capital Critters. That was the thing he worked on right before SWAT Cats.
We gotta do Capital Critters for What a Cartoon.
Right?
We need to do like every Simpsons also ran from like 92.
If I wish I could go back in time that when all of those debuted, we did like we do with like King of the Hill and Mission Hill and just go like, this week's Talking Simpsons, Capital Critters or Fish Police or Family Dog.
We would have lost so many people in the early years.
Yeah, you're right. You're like, well, they're going to fucking do Capital Critters. I don't like this new podcast.
I don't want to hear John Ritter as a fish.
But now we've earned enough capital to do Capital Critters. I wasn't trying to make a joke there. Anyway, Davis Doy, he comes on to SWAT Cats to develop these cool designs of jet flying cat men and turn it into an actual story. He worked alongside some other writers. After SWAT Cats, he'd go on to be a supervising producer on Two Stupid Dogs, Dexter, Johnny Bravo, and he still actually, Davis Doy, is in the industry to this day. He was an executive producer on the very recent Care Bears thing that's only on Boomerang in the U.S. But
really, those Care Bears are still getting some action out there.
If you look at it, it's like, what if you draw Care Bears in the current Cartoon Network style? I think it was their hope of making a My Little Pony Friendship is Magic for Care Bears, but wasn't as popular.
I kind of think we need Care Bears now more than ever.
Tenderheart will save us all, man. But so you got David Stoy. Under him, the most important writer on SWAT Cats, who wrote the majority of the episodes, Glenn Leopold, another Hanna-Barbera lifer. He wrote over 70 episodes of Smurfs. Also wrote on Snorks and Super Friends, and even a few Scooby-Doo things in the 80s. Leopold loved the world of SWAT Cats. It's very important to him. He wrote many episodes, and most of the things people love about SWAT Cats character-wise, that's Leopold. And the second most prominent writer was Lance Falk. Lance Falk worked his way up from the mailroom in Hanna-Barbera to work on the art side of things, doing character design work mainly, but then he started to transition over to the story team. Like, he worked on Scooby properties like 13 Ghosts and Pup, and he also worked on Tiny Toons and Animaniacs right before coming on to Scooby-Doo, Zombie Island. And SWAT Cats was his first chance to write, and he really, really enjoyed it. I want to thank a podcast named Scooby-Doo for their interview with Lance Falk, because this gave a lot of information for the making of Zombie Island. And so Lance Falk, he actually much prefers SWAT Cats to Scooby-Doo, but he's like, it was a job. Finally, another first-time writer on SWAT Cats was Jim Stenstrom, who had been working on Scooby stuff since 1983, one of the chief character designers of 80s Hanna-Barbera stuff, and he'd go on to be a big-time director on many Hanna-Barbera properties. So, SWAT Cats abruptly is canceled during second season production. Like, there's multiple episodes that are boarded and voiced that didn't get shipped overseas, and, rumors suggest that either Ted Turner didn't like how violent the show was, even though it was a top-rated show. He just unilaterally canceled it over the violence. Or it could be that the creators owned it, and so Hanna-Barbera or Turner was like, well, we're not investing this much in a thing we don't own.
It was a real quizzle book.
Yeah.
the fake Duke Phillips canceled this show. Yeah, I was reading it, just like it was like the #1 rated kid show in some certain category.
Yeah.
So it was like I totally missed it. I mean, I was aware of it, but I wasn't very interested in it. But I know a lot of furries love it.
There was, yes, definitely. There was a summer I really enjoyed the SWAT Cats, because it is like a really good action show starring like cat people, and also like Zombie Island, it's anime, but I'll get to that later. But it's canceled during production. There's like, I think 4 episodes that were fully commissioned written scripts that were in different stages of being finished that never got finished. And among those is a Glenn Leopold written story about a succubus who uses an amulet to suck the life force out of people.
Sounds hot.
Well, he back pockets that for a rainy day on a Scooby movie. So SWAT Cats is done. A lot of the SWAT Cats team is still at Hanna-Barbera. So David Stoy, Glenn Leopold, Lance Falk, and Jim Stenstrom move over to the second season of The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, which
I did like that show a lot.
That was the one that had like, it kind of was rebooty at times. They're like, oh, we're going to go into the virtual world or whatever. Yeah, which I bet that doesn't hold up as well.
No.
The show ran for 52 episodes, but really the second half that Doy and his team worked on, they wanted to even just call it a new series name because it is so different. But those episodes show how good that team is at recapturing what was great about a classic Hanna-Barbera property, but updating it for the 90s and making it work not just to old people who remember it, but appealing to kids as well. Also, Glenn Leopold brings back this idea for an episode of Johnny Quest where there's a life-draining necklace found in New Orleans. So again, he's really into this idea that will be brought back in Zombie Island.
I don't know, were they showing the original Johnny Quest when we were kids? Because I don't remember seeing it. And like when Race Banyan was on Deep Space Homer, I had no idea that was a parody until later.
I remember watching it at some point in the 90s, but I can't remember. I think it was after Race Banyan was on that. But when Freakazoid did their Johnny Quest parody, I do think those reruns I had been watching somewhere.
I think I knew enough about the idea of Johnny Quest to get, what was the Freakazoid one called? Yeah, it was called Toby Danger, and like you even mentioned it, but it's so lost in the DNA of the show. But yeah, Venture Brothers was a Johnny Quest parody because nothing on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim could exist without first being a parody of a 70s or 60s thing outside of like Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
They make it as close to it as possible. Then the first season, they got Venture Brothers, they got permission to make explicit Johnny Quest references, and after a couple seasons seasons, somebody in the Cartoon Network structure was like, hey, you can't have literal Ray Spannon show up and die or have literal Johnny Quest be like a heroin addict. You can't do that. So I think he's Action Johnny now and Dr. Z in the later seasons, and they make it clear they're not the Quest. But so, Real Adventures of Johnny Quest ends 1997. They run the typical 52 episodes, and they move on. At this time, Warner is taking new pitches on the Hanna-Barbera catalog, and as Fox says in that interview, it was a really tough time pitching anything to Warner. Warner was just not into it. Fox we had some really good pitches of how to reuse old Hanna-Barbera stuff, and they just weren't into it. Warner was like, nah, they just turned everything down. But they were seeing that Scooby-Doo had a very high Q rating, and even without existing in anything new, they still sold a whole lot of Scooby-Doo merch, and it was the highest rated thing on Cartoon Network. Meanwhile, within the Hanna-Barbera building, Bill Hanna is still there, Joe Barbera is still there, Iwao Takamoto is still there. Bill Hanna is kind of fading. He's not doing so well. He'll pass away in 2001. But Joe Barbera, he's still got some juice left.
He sure does.
The 90s were a tough year for Hanna-Barbera.
And they were not on speaking terms.
Yes, that's
towards the end of their
true.
lives.
Yeah, Takamoto kind of often was like the interstitial for that. So there is some interest in doing more Scooby. Not only that, but by 1995, 96, 97, the direct-to-video market is getting huge in America. We've talked about how Tiny Toons started it, and then Return of Jafar exploded it even bigger. And so they should be focusing on that instead of the TV movies they did in the early 90s. And so they are able to sell, Davis Doyle and his team are able to sell to Warner / Hanna-Barbera / Cartoon Network, doing a brand new Scooby thing that will be direct to video. And as Fox tells it, they were given, quote, total autonomy on developing this. Like, they said they were given a budget and a general timeline of delivery in over a 9-month period, but executives were like, just do more Scooby. Think of some more Scooby. I don't know.
I'm sure they thought these men will simply plug in the money printing machine.
Yes, yeah.
And it's pretty, you can't mess that up.
So Davis Doyle regroups Glenn Leopold, Lance Stock, and Jim Stenstrom, all as the story team, though then Stenstrom eventually is the director of this new Scooby property while they're all trying to think of what to do. Lance and Jim are kind of the artists in the room as Lance explains it. Glenn Leopold is doing a lot of the pitching, and then Jim is like, I'll draw this and draw this, coming up with the characters for the pitch. They hit an interesting crossroads where Stenstrom pitched that after all these years of taking masks off of some loser trying to steal something, it'd be cool to finally have real monsters in Scooby-Doo.
I think it's also been lost to time how much of a hook that was and how important that gimmick was for this movie.
It was a huge part of the marketing, gigantic. This Stenstrom, you have to really thank him for coming up with that, because if this had just been another Scooby adventure with good animation, it might have been a hit, but at least marketing wise, way harder to do there.
It eliminated one of my main frustrations with the show when I was a kid, and that the monsters were always people.
Yeah.
And I know that was just to make, kids to reassure them there are no real monsters, they're always going to be unmasked, but that just would frustrate me as a kid. No, I want the Frankenstein to be real.
On 13 Ghosts and some of the scrappy stuff, there were real monsters there too.
Yeah.
Those were the exceptions to the rule for sure. Otherwise, it was a guy in a mask. And I think too, it really works better in this film that there is a clear delineation between we are used to guys in masks, now we are scared by monsters, instead of in those scrappy era ones are monsters, yikes. They're not even talking about how this is a change from how they've operated all this time. So Stenstrom pitches that. Leopold is no, the appeal of Scooby-Doo is having a solvable mystery that kids watching along can get into, which, Pup Named Scooby-Doo, that got it so far with it that Velma looks at the camera and says, have you figured it out yet? So Leopold really wants to do a classic Scooby mystery. And Davis Doyle is of the opinion that, if kids watch an 80-minute thing and then at the end it's it was fake all along, that sucks. So Lance Falk says it was he who ultimately pitched. He says this was his biggest creative contribution to it, was he said, why not do both? Have real monsters actually exist, but there is still culprits and suspects, and you still have to figure out who unleashed these real monsters. And they also came up with a very clever idea of like, time has passed. These are not the same teens. They're not their forever teen selves. They are now at some point in their 20s. They have graduated from college. They have real jobs, and they exist separate from one another. And this is their big reunion. Like, that was another very key part to telling this story that they came up with. And it let them redesign the characters.
Yeah, that also made it feel more important. It's just like they weren't frozen in time. Things had happened to them, and they need to reunite.
And they could reflect on like, oh, I remember I used to do that. And
make fun of their ascots. So many ascots.
Oh God, there's a few ascot jokes in here for sure. And it was Stenstrom who handled the majority of the character redesigns, specifically for Fred and Daphne, because there was a general internal feeling of that they were the two most 70s looking characters, and that, you know, Falk had this great point that like, Shaggy's timeless. There are dirt bags in every era.
There's always brown pants.
There's always brown pants. There's always guys wearing too big of shirts who have messy hair. They're just called different things every decade, but they'll always look like Shaggy. And a dog's always a dog.
But we've escaped the era of men wearing ascots and having one hand tucked into their tight jeans.
And even his haircut is like, Fred, come on, get with the times. And Daphne, too, she's supposed to be a fashionista. Like, if Daphne ever gets a character trait, it's that she really likes fashion and dressing well. And for the actual setting and the plot, Glenn Leopold returns again to his New Orleans succubus stories that he had done for Johnny Quest and SWAT Cats, reworking it into a new Scooby-Doo adventure. And I really like, in all of this era of Scooby movies, they take a specific locale and do story points based around that. You know, it's all about different flavors of Americana scares. And in the case of Zombie Island, it's like, boy, New Orleans is kind of swampy and scary and has voodoo, right? What are we going to do? So that's the team. They decide on their story, pitch out the plot, redesign the characters. Stenstrom's directing, animation director among many, but the key one is Robert Alvarez, who we've talked about him a ton. He's a key person on Gennady Tartakovsky stuff. Worked on Dexter, Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, Regular Show, Infinity Train, even now.
Okay.
He's a very skilled director, and he'd worked with them on SWAT Cats. So this really is a SWAT Cats reunion. There couldn't be a Scooby-Doo Zombie Island without SWAT Cats. And also on the production side, Lance pegged an important secret sauce to this was Iwao Takamoto was involved a little bit. He mentioned that, and this was in Takamoto's book as well, that he had basically become like an elder statesman in H&B who, you know, it's like, oh, we need a nice new poster for Scooby-Doo. Well, Takamoto can handle it. He'll jump on that. But he is kind of out of the production side of things. And Lance Falk was the one who came to him and was like, hey, do you think you could help us a little with figuring out the specifics on this? Takamoto says he mainly helped with comedy bits involving Shaggy and Scooby in this movie. Like, he boarded out some of it, tinkered with the designs to make them extra right or correct to the Scooby world. So the creator of Scooby-Doo still is involved in this. On top of Barbera and Hannah are credited as executive producers in this too. And I'm sure they had some input, but at this point, they're even more figureheads than Takamoto.
Oh, yeah. It was just like wheeled in front of them as they had a cocktail.
I approve of more Scooby. Whatever. I don't pitch this anymore. All right, voice actors.
Yay.
This is a controversial era of Scooby-Doo because Casey Kasem ain't happy.
Nope.
So
that little dog Snuggles really pissed him off.
So Casey Kasem had become a vegan. He'd been recording Shaggy, who is not a vegan, for decades. And Casey Kasem is Shaggy in Johnny Bravo. So that's right up to the edge of production on this. But the story is that there was a 1996 Burger King Kids Club meal that involved Scooby toys, and Shaggy and Scooby go through the drive-thru to order order cheeseburgers, and that was the last straw for him. He couldn't stand it. He would not abide by having Shaggy be a meat eater anymore.
I applaud him for having principles, and I like how it rarely happens in cartoons, but the one instance I can think of is Lisa Simpson. They kept her a vegetarian for the past 25 years.
Though I wonder if it wasn't Paul McCartney, one of the most famous people ever, told them, you better do this.
You don't want to be Beatle shamed.
And when Paul McCartney dies, this is skipping to the end of the story, but when Casey Kasem passed away, I have a feeling that you see Shaggy eating lots of identifiable meat-based things. But anyway, at this time in 1996, Kasem quits. Who will replace him? But only for Zombie Island? Why, our favorite voice actor in the world, Billy West. And I could explain the story for you, but Billy West has it so much funnier.
The other one you were talking about after that, Shaggy.
Yeah.
Well,
because Casey Kasem's still alive.
Of course he is, but the thing was, I said I was a vegan, but he's like a militaristic vegan.
Is he just?
And he would read the scripts and he'd go, come on, Scoob, let's go get a hot dog. and then he would go, why does it always have to be a hot dog? I said, what do you mean? I mean, can't they eat, like, veggie snacks, like a veggie burger or a veggie hot dog?
They're vegging out later in the back of that van.
And so he really had a problem with it, and he didn't do it for a while, so they made this one called Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. And I was doing Shaggy for that, and... it was a one-off, really.
Right.
We're doing Talking Futurama right now. I just think Fry's being interviewed.
Yes, right? The younger he sounds, the more he sounds like Fry. That was from a British radio show, which I have come to realize that I think, much like Simpsons, British people love Scooby-Doo in a more intense way than most Americans do.
And Billy West is a vegan. I didn't know that until this interview.
No, me neither. Or at least he was in in 2014 when he did that interview, he was. So yeah, there you go. Casey Kasem, a militant vegan. Lance Falk put it is that he just felt that it was too out of character for Shaggy. He's like, I approve of you, Casey, being a vegan, but we've written Shaggy as a pig who eats anything, and we don't want to rewrite the character. Like, in the movie, there's jokes about, like, we're eating a bunch of crawdads from a bucket, Scoob. And you do have to rewrite that scene to something else, and I think they didn't want to.
Now, someone who still eats seafood, I find crawdads disgusting. It's just like you're splitting open bugs.
Yeah, eat a bucket of cockroaches then, Why cut out the middleman?
But yeah, as of this recording, I have not rewatched the movie. Of course, I'll rewatch it before we do the movie discussion segment, but I'm interested in hearing Billy West as Shaggy because it's so fuzzy in my mind. I've only seen this once when it originally came out on VHS.
He's all right, I would say.
That's my opinion of him as Bugs Bunny, too.
Yeah, in both those cases, he can do the job, but they get a better Shaggy for the next movies. But Billy West does it in this one. For the next few years, he's just Casey Kasem is on the outs with Scooby-Doo, and I think he's being kind of public about how he's on the outs with it. But the healing would begin in 2002, not surprisingly around when the live-action film was coming out, and they wanted to have good publicity. And that is when they decide, fine, Shaggy's a vegetarian. In the live-action film, he is very explicitly a vegetarian. He eats, the first thing you see Shaggy eat in the movie is an eggplant burger.
I've never seen the movie because it always struck me as it hit too late. Mm-hmm. I feel like it came about 5 years too late.
That's how slow Hollywood is. I just rewatched it because it's on HBO Max, and it is better than I remember. It could have been 8,000 times worse than it was.
Yeah. Casting is perfect, I will say that.
Absolutely. So perfect that Matthew Lillard, who could have just been any old scumbag who's just like, I'm playing Shaggy, who fucking cares? He actually really cared about respecting Casey Kasem's choices and befriending him, and he's like, I want to inherit this role from you. But so there's the live action movie and there's a new TV show. That's when Casey Kasem returns to the role of Shaggy, plays him pretty regularly until Kasem's retirement from full-time acting in 2009. And Matthew Lillard takes over and has been doing it ever since in pretty much all cases, except in that Scoob movie, which sucks. I've watched it now. Sucks. Anyway. So that's who you got. Billy West is Shaggy in this movie. After the passing of Don Messick, they are searching for a new Scooby voice, and they find it in voice actor / Scooby superfan Scott Inez. Scott Inez is apparently like he was pretty young in 98. He had mainly been a radio DJ who I think got popular through like, oh, I can imitate all these cartoon characters. Like he does Popeye in a commercial.
So kind of like Billy West,
very much like Billy
who
West.
started in radio and Howard Stern.
You're right. He also apparently has a giant Scooby merchandise collection that they like filmed for a DVD extra on one of these. So Inez can do a really good Scooby, and he takes over the role. Not only that, but when Billy leaves after Zombie Island, he also takes over Shaggy and does a pretty good Shaggy. But in 2003, they decide we're getting Frank Welker in all the time anyway, and he also does a good Scooby.
Oh, yeah.
So Frank has been Scooby ever since. Even in Scoob, he's the one regular who got to keep his voice. Because I think they realized, like, why are we going to hire a celebrity to imitate Scooby-Doo? Let's just have Frank Welker.
When he retires, there's going to be like 300 new jobs.
Exactly.
In the voice acting community.
He's everything. He's I want him to live another 20 years. Let's keep him. He's in his early 70s now.
What will our new Garfield sound like in the future?
He could do so much better with that with the Garfield he does. Anyway, so Welker took over that role and Lillard took over Shaggy. Inez was out, though he would keep doing Scooby and Shaggy in like video games and commercials, the cheap things you don't pay for the bigger names for. But he's basically just a radio guy now. Inez is mostly out of the voice acting game. As for the rest of Mystery Inc., they get back Frank Welker as Fred because who else could it be? Fred is Frank Welker's voice. It might be the most irreplaceable of the voices he does because it just is him. But they do need new Daphne and Velma actors. For Velma, they get BJ Ward. She takes over. She's most famous, I think, as like Scarlet from G.I. Joe, every boy's crush in the 80s. And she had been Betty Rubble from the Flintstone Kids up through the 90s. Anytime they needed a Betty Rubble, she was Betty Rubble. So Hanna-Barbera knew her really well. And she's pretty good as Velma. I think she's a good Velma. She debuted as Velma in the Johnny Bravo episode. And then she'd be replaced in 2003 by returning original Velma Nicole Jaffe, though then Nicole Jaffe would retire and Natalie from Facts of Life, Mindy Cohn, takes over the voice until 2016 when Kate Micucci took over the voice, and now she's the current Velma.
For now. That's a revolving door, that Velma gig.
Though, she's the youngest Velma I think they've hired in a while, so I think she could be doing it for a couple
Youngest
decades.
at 40?
I guess I think of Kate Micucci as forever 26.
Yeah.
But
those ukulele days are long behind her.
When you hold a ukulele, you look so much younger.
Yes, or you just look larger.
But BJ Ward, I think she's a good Velma, and she's, a voice acting lifer, so a good hire. Daphne had been actress Heather North from the second season of Scooby, Where Are You, up to 1986, Daphne's last appearance. She even came back for the Johnny Bravo one as Heather North, just like Casey Kasem. But they decide for Zombie Island, not going to use Heather North. They're going to replace her with another voice acting regular, Mary Kay Bergman, who does a really great job with the character in this and the next couple movies. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a South Park viewer, you probably know this already. But yeah, so Mary Kay Bergman was, in the early years of South Park, basically every woman that spoke was her. On top of that, she was the original Timmy Turner in the Fairly Odd Parents pilot.
On South Park, she worked under a pseudonym because she still wanted to work for Disney, because she was doing a lot of Disney stuff as well.
I forgot that. Yeah. And sadly, she suffered mostly unawares of most people in her life with major mental health issues, including anxiety and depression, and ultimately took her own life on November 11th, 1999. Very, very sad.
Yeah, even when I see a South Park clip now, 21 years later, I'm like, the women still sound wrong to me.
Yeah, that she did such a good job as like Cartman's mom that the impressions of it don't sound the same to me.
Yeah, she's the one who sings Blame Canada in the movie.
That's right. God damn, man. It's very, you can read more about it if you want. It's a sad story. The last movie she's in of Scooby-Doo is dedicated in her memory as well. It's So after Bergman's passing, Gray Delisle takes over the role for the fourth film of this era of Scooby. She's been playing Daphne ever since. She's in her 20th year as Daphne now.
And she's currently filling in for Russi Taylor, right? On The
Simpsons.
Simpsons.
That's right. Yeah, she took over the Russi Taylor roles. So So the rest of the cast in this is very strong. It's a lot of the voice acting lifers. You got Jim Cummings, you got Cam Clark, you got Tara Strong. Plus you have movie stars turned voice acting veterans Mark Hamill and Adrienne Barbeau, who are fresh off of Batman the Animated Series. The voice director on it was Chris Zimmerman, the usual casting director for Hanna-Barbera stuff at the time, who had worked on SWAT Cats and Johnny Quest. Again, keeping this more SWAT Cats. But enough of that bullshit. Anime. Let's talk about anime.
I've been waiting this entire time to talk about anime.
All right. So the reason Zombie Island looks so good is because they went with a Japanese animation production company.
And in 98, being someone who was just like wading into the world of anime, that's one of the big things that made me want to see this. Just seeing commercials and saying, that's anime, I'm seeing it. It looks like all the best Animaniacs and Tiny Toons that I love, and I know those come from Japan, and I'm starting to figure out like the world of outsourcing and what I like to see, and this is what I wanted.
Exactly. Yeah, by late 1998, I think you could finally realize like, oh, this is anime. This looks and moves just like all of the anime I am watching nonstop in 1999 or late 1998. Well, and that was the secret of SWAT Cats that I also had realized by that time. The best looking SWAT Cats episodes were also anime, like insanely anime, as were the best looking Johnny Quest episodes. Those were done by the production company Mook Animation, Mook.
It's named after something Bugs Bunny calls a villain.
I wonder if that's intentional. I wonder. So Mook Animation spun out of a bigger company, but established independently in 1986. And a lot of its work was subcontractor stuff, not just on American shows, but also on a lot of anime. But they're like in-betweeners or color checkers, or also like, oh, we're hard up against a deadline. Get Mook on this. But I think they're usually relegated to like C team or B team status on a lot of big name anime productions. Like you'll see their names in the credits for stuff like Akira, Detective Conan, Yu-Gi-Oh, stuff we've done on What a Cartoon. But they're like, sub tier. They're very late in the credits, but they can be counted on in this tertiary capacity on these major shows. They worked a lot with the company AIC, which we talked about on Bubblegum Crisis. Like, especially if you watch Zombie Island and then watch like a Tenchi Muyo back to back with it, you're like, boy, this moves pretty similar. Their biggest work, and I think the most work they put into an anime at a top level, was AIC's 1995 cyberpunk film Armitage 3. Which I think was also an OVA series.
I recall the DVD cover of that one, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, I don't think I ever watched it either. It did look good, and maybe I'm going to check it out now. But it definitely felt like it came from the same school of thought as the production of Ghost in the Shell, and it came out the same year as Ghost in the Shell. And it's like, well, internationally, cyberpunk anime like Akira is doing great. Let's make another one of those. Armitage 3 was definitely marketed very heavily in the U.S. on that.
Oh, God, yeah. I'm looking at the box now, and I've seen this.
I have that box, blazed into my memory. So that was the anime that Mook worked on a ton in the 80s and 90s. On the U.S. side of things, they worked on lots of really good stuff and also less good stuff, including Alf Tales, Beverly Hills Teens, the third season of Eon Flux, Video Power, the lesser Captain N show, and that was right around when David Stoy found them and signed them a few SWAT Cats. And David Stoy loved them. They're like, these are the best looking episodes of SWAT Cats. I want to keep working with Mook as long as possible, was Stoy's feeling on that. And same when he took over Johnny Quest. He was like, we're giving every episode we can to Mook. Whatever they can take on, they're going to do it. And on top of that, they are working on Johnny Quest. They also work on, in 97, Mummies Alive and Spawn. They work under Madhouse on Spawn, but I think they're the lead studio on Mummies Alive. But so Mook's pretty busy, and they get contacted by Doy for honestly their biggest project yet, I think, because they are going to be the lead production house on a direct-to-video Scooby movie that will have a real budget, like the biggest budget they worked at, way bigger than they worked at on SWAT Cats. And so they sign up for it. They're like, all right, we're going to work on Zombie Island. And yeah, when you watch Zombie Island, it just screams anime. Timing of the movement, posing of characters, like lighting effects, like when a giant green light appears and zaps things. It's straight out of an anime.
Yeah, I really want to know what Like how much of this was done in Japan. It just feels like Japan kind of took over. The Japanese studio just took this over. Just the way it moves and looks. It just such a Japanese looking production, like a Japanese outsourced looking production.
Based on the credits, definitely boarding was all U.S. side, but I don't even know if layout too much was done.
It's like, we'll take your suggestions on these posters. Thank you.
And pretty much all the key animation is the Japanese side of things, with some subcontracting to other Japanese studios and also a teeny bit of Korea in there too. But and another thing that makes it very anime, the film has a G-rated upskirt joke in it as well.
Yeah, yes.
Which is like kind of shocking to see now, but insanely anime. So there's 3 artists from Mook I want to spotlight that really helped make this film really great. Like, I think this is a good script and it's true to Scooby-Doo, but I think if this wasn't done by the production house that did it, like if it was given to the people who animated Arabian Nights, it would suck or it wouldn't be very good.
Yeah, I pulled up some clips of Arabian Nights while we were talking, and it looks like cheap digital trash from the early 90s.
So cheap, like, and so flat. Scooby and Shaggy have never looked so flat. It's honestly an insult to Takamoto's character designs, the way they
not
look
even like a
that.
stylized flatness. It's just like, no, this is poorly drawn and doesn't move well.
It's just ugly. We did it cheap, yeah. But the 3 artists in Mook I wanted to recognize. First up, we got Kazuhiro Arai, who is the background director. He was art director on the Bubblegum Crisis episodes
Wow.
we did. So 5 years after he finished his work on Bubblegum Crisis, he worked on Scooby-Doo Zombie Island. Of the animation directors, 2 I wanted to point out, you got Yoshihige Kosako, who was development director, art director, series director for Belle and Sebastian, the Nickelodeon show Belle and Sebastian. Well, I mean, it came Nickelodeon. That's where we know from. And he also was one of the key animators on Mask of the Phantasm.
Oh, awesome. I trust him.
And we have Kiyoshi Nakamura, who was animation director on a million things, but including Gundam, Darkwing Duck, Goof Troop, and the Bonk Man. He worked on
like a lot of the Disney Japan stuff.
Yes,
Again,
yeah.
I trust all of these people.
He's a Disney Japan guy who I think came on for like a one job thing for Mook for this. But yeah, Mook just does a fantastic, fantastic job on this. And not surprisingly, Davis Doi, while he was in charge of the next 3 Scooby movies after Zombie Island, kept Mook on as long as he could. They produce all 4 of this era of Scooby movies. Once they're done with Scooby, they move on to a couple U.S. things like X-Men Evolution and Stripperella.
All right. Hey, no, Stan Lee's Stripperella.
I'm sorry.
He put
I
his
took
name
away
on
his
that.
credit there, yeah. But I still think that's probably the best cartoon of that Adult Swim ripoff on Spike.
Oh, I mean, yeah, out of Gary the Rat and Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon.
Yeah.
Barf.
But after 2003 or so, their jobs kind of slowed down for Mook. I think they had trouble transitioning into the digital age out of ink and paint, and like they were getting fewer anime jobs. They were always subcontracting stuff. They had no hit anime that they owned. So like Gynax survived because they could merchandise the shit out of Evangelion. That couldn't happen for Mook. And one of their final gigs was on the Transformers Animated, that's what it's called, from 2008, which was made in conjunction with the Bay movies. But that was it. I couldn't find anything they produced over 2008. I couldn't find a story that like Mook closes down or whatever. But based on credits, I think they were pretty much done by 08 or 09. I would guess that global recession around them probably also didn't help out.
Oh, God,
Mook.
yes. The industries that we lost.
Yeah. But fortunately, you don't have to worry about that in 2021.
Some would say it hasn't ended.
Yeah.
And it's terror time again. They've got you running through the night. Yes, it's terror time again. Oh, you just might